was not planning on making a video today, but I was actually doing some prep work for future videos and kind of like planning out what I wanted to talk about, making some like loose scripts. And I don't know, like something about this particular topic feels like it kind of needs to be, I don't know, I just feel like kind of drawn to talk about it. So I don't have a ton of time, but I wanted to squeeze in a video about how I wrote a memoir about living and working in Yellowstone National Park and what happened or what I learned as a result of creating a book about that. And the reason that I decided to talk about this is because I noticed that some older videos of mine where I talk about what it was like working in Yellowstone, where I talk about how I got a job working in Yellowstone, like I've just been getting notified of a lot of people interacting with those videos. And so I don't know, I felt like I don't really talk about Yellowstone on my channel. Like I feature part of it because I wrote a book about it, but most of my focus is on, you know, the book business, what you got to know, you know, supporting and empowering aspiring authors to understand, you know, how the landscape works. So I thought this would kind of be a nice way to combine both of those elements to sort of serve both audiences. So I don't know, I just felt compelled to talk about it. So that's what I'll be discussing. This isn't going to be a long video, just something that's kind of short and sweet, but I don't know, I just felt like it would kind of be worth talking about. So let's just get right into it. So I worked in Yellowstone National Park as a housekeeper for 2 summers. So total, it was about 6 months or so. They were in 3-month stints, both when I was 20 and 21 years old. So I was very young. It was between college sessions. I think I went right after my sophomore year and then right after my junior year, I think. And then senior year, I graduated and got a job and became an adult and all that stuff. So that's around the time I worked in Yellowstone. Compared to now, this was about 5-6 years ago, which is wild to think about because I feel like it was like 2 years ago or something. But I did it when I was pretty young, and I got inspired to do it because my dad did it a handful of times back in the 80s. I have some pictures actually that I'll just pop up here for anyone who's curious to see what working in Yellowstone in the 80s looked like. But what was really cool though is that like within that 30-year difference, like it still looked the same. Like it looked the same when I was there as when my dad was there, which is just wild because it just shows how completely untouched, you know, and preserved this environment is, you know. I don't know, I just feel like that's really cool. So there was no internet. The closest grocery store to us was like 2 hours east in like Cody, Wyoming, and some of my friends would hop over there and like watch the rodeo, or the Codeo as they called it. And I remember in my onboarding process when I got to the park the first time, I had no idea what I was doing. I was so intimidated, but I got there and there was like almost like wildlife training of like, okay, you're in a national park, it's a little bit different, you know, nothing is off limits. You are in these animals' home, right? Like you are sharing space with this wildlife, you know, with all these creatures that live, you know, in the, you know, northwestern region. Here's what you got to know: keep a distance of 200 feet, carry bear spray always, you know, stuff like that, which is basically a giant, it's either a giant can of mace or a very small fire extinguisher, and it's just like you carry it around, and if a bear attacks you, you spray it. So it's just like crazy things like that are just so off the cuff for, you know, normal summer jobs for when you're in college, which leads me well into why I decided to write a book. And it was because I felt like I had a unique story to tell. When I told people that I worked in Yellowstone National Park, it's usually like, oh wow, what was that like? Which is cool if you are curious about working in a national park in general. Just know that is the card that you whip out when someone says, okay, let's go around and say a fun fact about ourselves. Like that has been my go-to for like 5 or 6 years. So if you're interested or you have worked in a national park, that's like the fun fact card that you can pull out like right and left, and automatically there's going to be a story, there's going to be a conversation, people are going to be interested. So as a result of that, I was like, you know, this was a very unique situation. It, I believe, warrants a story. I just haven't heard of many stories or books of people working in the wild or, you know, living in national parks. I wanted to read more books specifically about women in the wild. So I was like, you know, I think there's room for me and my idea on the shelf. It took me about 5 years to do that, mostly because I had no clue what I was doing. It took 5 years to write it, multiple drafts, self-edit, get it professionally edited, market it, and eventually get it published. So if you don't have much context or a frame of reference, that's a fairly long time to do a book. It's not the worst ever, you know, people, I think Squid Games, the guy took like 10 years to write it or something like that. But for me, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. There's no how to write a book 101, like holy grail resource or something. So I was kind of feeling my way through. It was like feeling my way through a dark room. But it took 5 years. I got it published last year in June of 2023 through a small press. And this is just what I learned as a result of being a debut author, having written a memoir about living and working in Yellowstone National Park. So with that context explained and out of the way, these are just things that I learned that I just thought I would pass on. I think the biggest thing that I learned is that it was for sure a young adult book, and I suspected it would be. But the range that I had in mind, which was about 18 to like 30, 35-ish years old, I don't know. I felt like that range was appropriate for the kind of story that I had. But as I was seeing these reviews come in and advanced reader reviews come in, I just saw, a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, like this is 100% for, high schoolers especially was a big part of the YA audience that came up. A lot of people who are wanting to get out, they're finding themselves, they're coming into their own, they want to, get a taste of freedom, they want to kind of take up more space within themselves, like they've done everything that they needed to do, they went through school, XYZ, and they want to get a taste of freedom for the first time. So that was a piece that I had suspected, but was nice to have confirmed by other readers, because it's really easy for your nose to get really close to the painting. So the point with that, at least from the writer perspective, is to get crystal clear on who your audience is as early as possible. Even before you even write the book, ideally. If you're already writing or working on something, it's fine, just keep it in mind. But, who is reading your book is the person that you need to be writing to. Like, find a person in your mind that matches that readership audience, that target audience, write to them, and it'll come out a little more smoothly and a little more naturally and authentically on the page. So that was my number one. Number two, I knew the story was unique based on the response that I got when I told people what I was working on. And I guess a little sub point underneath that one is that I don't really feel like anyone took me seriously until I said that I was getting my book published, because, everyone and their mother wants to be a writer. And I think that's a really amazing goal for creatives, for people who have a story to tell. It's like being one of the many. Everyone wants to write a book, but then saying that it's coming out this June or later this year, I mean, it's like a whole other level where people are like, oh, you meant you were writing a book. And it's like, yeah, I said I was going to write a book. I said I was going to write a book. So yeah, it's coming out. And so that was kind of interesting, but I knew the story itself was unique based on the response that I got from people when they asked, oh, what's your book about? Or if I was at conferences or trying to meet these professionals and, industry experts, they would say, oh, what project are you working on? I'd say it's about living and working in Yellowstone National Park. It would be like, oh, wow. I'd get like the big eyeball kind of look. And that goes back to like what I said earlier about it's going to be a fun fact that you pull out of your pocket for probably the rest of your life. So I knew there was a lot of intrigue based on the response that I got, which was very affirming and validating that, this is a story worth writing about, because just even with a one sentence description, I already have people's attention. Number three, the first book is about proving to yourself that you can do it. 80% of Americans say that they want to write a book. 3% finish their first draft and less than 1% get it published. So proving to yourself that it is something that you are capable of doing is like, it's huge. I mean, it's like your comfort zone totally extends. The respect you have for yourself totally skyrockets. It's just like you feel you have this whole other identity now as an author, as a writer, and it's intimidating, but if you kind of lean into it and get used to it and own it a little bit, it can be a really cool experience. Number four is that criticism can be hard. Don't read the reviews on Goodreads or Amazon unless you have thick skin, Goodreads especially. They tend to be a little bit harsher on Goodreads, but some of them are great, some of them aren't so great. People would be like, oh, I didn't really like how she handled the situation, and I would be like, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. That's how it happened. This isn't like a work of fiction. Like, this is how I responded to real life events. So that part kind of irked me a little bit. and it's so hard to not like pop out from behind the curtain and be like, excuse me, it was a lot of work to make that book. Can you just like be a little kinder, like have a little grace? But it's hard to not do that. But just, be forewarned that reading reviews is not for the faint of heart. Number five, if you love your story, it's your job to make other people love it with you. You need to make someone feel like they are in your shoes, experiencing what you're experiencing. It's all about someone feeling represented, either through your perspective, through your challenge, through your personality, through where you come from, your culture, whatever. Like, there needs to be some kind of identity relation that has to happen in order for people to kind of live that story vicariously through you in the way that you tell your story. So there always needs to be a point. There always needs to be a payoff if you're telling a story. Number 6, it's really hard, really, really hard to kill your darlings. That's a phrase, a very common phrase that I first heard from Stephen King in his book on writing. And it's all about taking out the fluff. If it means something to you, but it's not going to serve your readership, you got to get rid of it. You got to kill your darling. It's like shooting a puppy. It feels awful. It feels illegal, but it must be done. We all have to do it. Any book worth reading has gone through a process of darling killing, and it's hard, but there has to be a point. There has to be a reason for including something in a book other than to just make you feel good. Number 7, this is probably a lesser known one that I hear talked about, and it's that it can be embarrassing when people that you know read your book, especially if it's a memoir. Memoirs can get pretty vulnerable pretty quickly. They usually circle or orbit around some kind of challenge or obstacle or something like that. But people know you in different ways. Your family knows you in different ways than your friends do, than your colleagues do. And in my book, there was a part where I guess I'll just say it, I was getting picked on, I guess I'll say. I was getting picked on by, at the time, a friend of mine. And I had a lot of conflicting feelings about it, and I kind of go into what that felt like for me, what happened, what that was like. And knowing that colleagues and older family members of mine were reading that made me cringe a little bit, but I told it because I knew that someone else out there would benefit from me telling the truth and talking about what I did and how I sort of processed my way through that. So it's hard to have people read your book, but if you tell the truth, which is my next point, my last point, it's that if you're going to tell the truth, it helps the reader feel like they can relate to you, and it helps you feel a little bit more accessible as a person because it shows that there are flaws, there are secrets that you have. You don't have to spill your guts. Don't spill your guts if you're not comfortable with it. Just only include what is necessary to the story or the point that you're making. So be honest with yourself. That was like the big thing, is just tell the truth. That was like my mantra the whole time, of like, tell the truth. If you don't tell the truth, I feel like if I didn't, I would feel like I was cheating myself out of my own story. Like if I didn't want to tell it at all if I wasn't going to be honest about it. So if you really want to access a reader authentically, be willing to at least some degree tell the truth. So that's all I had to share. I have to hop off in like a minute. I have a call coming up, but I wanted to kind of get this out and just talk a little bit about, the aftermath of those Yellowstone videos, my older ones, and they are quite old. They're probably 2 or 3 years old, but I hope you got something out of this. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you have a story that you want to write, if you're curious about that side of things, check out my other videos. I talk a lot about just things that people don't know about the book business, what happens when you decide to be a writer, sort of things that you got to know that a lot of people don't. So that's all I got. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.